If he comes, don't give me to him. Please. Elena dropped her head onto her hands folded on the table and let her tears fall. Alexander, standing next to her, looked at her with sympathy and confusion, because today in his life broke into the one who he, in fact, has already managed to forget. Not that at all, because the first love, it is such a thing difficult to forget, and yet, since he and Elena had a chance to live there happily ever after together, many years had passed. They'd known each other since the sandbox. Moreover, literally it was in it that they met. Then Sasha was a baby newcomer on the playground. His parents had just moved into the purchased apartment, and he, torn away from his familiar environment and old friends, was naturally a little scared. And so, he forgot when his mom took him for a walk to bring his toys. Mom forgot too, because she was so tired. She was confused about a lot of things. Here, said Sasha, suddenly a girl who sat in the sandbox opposite him and handed out a red bucket and 2 molds for sand in the form of animals. Do you need a dustpan? She asked. Yes, Sasha replied. That's how their friendship began. And then, when they went to school, it continued. They were each other's pride. They sat at the same desk and let each other cheat. They shared sweets and secrets. Lena's a good girl, and she has a good friend. A good boy, Mom joked. What, when you grow up, will you get married? Such jokes began when Elena was 14, and she, with the ardor typical of teenagers, was terribly offended by them. Such assumptions seemed to her simply insulting. You, Sasha, and I are together forever, but to marry, I may never get married at all. Mom, he's coming to our house for tea on Saturday, and please don't say that in front of him, okay? Or he won't want to see me again. Okay, daughter. Mom grinned then, but time will tell. And it did, because at the graduation, when they were circling in a slow dance, Sasha suddenly told Elena that he thought she was very beautiful. She was surprised because he had never said anything like that before, and the only compliment she got from him was about a sweatshirt with a tiger on it, which he said was cool. And after graduation, Sasha again behaved strangely. He invited Lena to sit in a cafe, in a real cafe, whereas before they had only gone together to fast food, where hamburgers sold. Finally, the last straw was the fact that Sasha showed up at Lena's house one day, ostensibly to return the book he had taken to read, but along with it, for some reason, he brought a bouquet of 3 scarlet roses. Why? Lena asked him in such a tone and looked at the flowers, as if the rustling paper contained not lovely buds, but hissing snakes. Just like that, Sasha answered. His knowledge of how to look after girls was not great, and now everything he had hoped for was disappearing like an ice sculpture under the rays of the sun in the Sahara. I don't need that, Lena said, and took only the book from his hands. There was an awkward pause. Sasha stood on the threshold of the apartment, and a draft was coming from the entrance. Elena's mother looked out into the corridor from the far room. Alexander, it's been a long time since you visited us. Would you like tea and cake? I baked your favorite Charlotte. Thank you, answered the young man, but I'd better go. Excuse me. Then, leaving, Alexander suddenly realized that there was nothing left for him in that apartment. And after all, he came not only to open in the sprouts of the first romantic feelings, but also to tell Lena very important news. The thing was that Sasha's parents were moving again, and he, accordingly, also disappeared from the city. And how much he had to tell Elena before the separation. But she drove him away. He decided that if she did not even take flowers, then even more so, she would not agree to listen to him, and even less should not expect to be understood. However, theoretically, before the big move there was still time after all. The apartment, although already sold, but it still had to be freed of all personal belongings. And just a couple of days later, Elena was already aware that her best friend would no longer live near her. But the main detail of the whole situation was that Sasha's parents were moving not just for fun and returned to another city for good to live closer to his grandparents, who were quite old. And so, his parents decided that the hustle and bustle of long-distance moving, it is not for a 17-year-old young man, and so they sent him early and ahead of themselves, so that there, living at his grandparents on the line of his father, waited for them, and then, as planned, will be the repair of the new apartment and the housewarming party. And just because of this urgent departure, Elena didn't have time to talk to Alexander as she wanted. She didn't have time to apologize to him personally and thank him for the flowers, which were so beautiful and were her favorite, of course. There was still such an option as to call and explain by phone, but Elena, with pain in her heart, decidedly refused it, because first of all, having barely had time to forgive Sasha, immediately again offended at him for not saying anything about the move, and secondly, because she decided that there was no point in it after all, How can they be friends further? If so, far from each other will live. In general, everything was decided by emotions, flavored with maximalism and fear of making the first step. In the same year Elena entered the university, she decided to become a lawyer. Time flew, and in late spring, on the verge of summer, Alexander unexpectedly called her. He said hello, and as if nothing had happened, asked her how things were going. "Fine," said Elena. "And you?" The conversation started, and the young people, without a word about the bitter past, shared the news with each other. Alexander went to study veterinarian, and he dreamed of treating wild animals, such as those that live in zoos. "Let's not get lost anymore," Elena suggested to him. "Never ever." "Well, let's try," Alexander replied with a laugh. And time flew on. They could write letters to each other, but it seemed to both of them that on paper, that is, on the screen of a smartphone or computer, words are formed into some awkward phrases that want to erase. And so, they used to call each other, but not often, and then less and less often. And finally, they began to communicate only once in 3 or 4 months, and not for long. So, outlining their lives roughly, sparingly, as if the artist, instead of painting a picture, suddenly decided that it is enough to put on the canvas another layer of primer, and then, so be it, splash a few drops of paint. Elena's life had been such that she might, if she were suddenly asked such a question, call it quite happy. And why, in fact, wouldn't she be? Her parents and close friends seemed to be healthy. After graduation, she got a job in a large furniture firm and sat quietly in the office, checking all sorts of documents and controlling the content of contracts. On weekends all summer long, the whole family went to the dacha. When Elena was 24 years old, she met a man. His name was Nicholas, and he was not that Prince Charming, but quite a decent option to arrange a personal life. So it seemed, at first. Despite the fact that Nicholas held a quite decent position as a manager in a bank, he was in no hurry to get his own place, preferring to rent an apartment. He said that long to pay the mortgage, it is stupid, that it is better to save up for housing. And when will it be possible? One day decided to talk seriously with her husband Elena. Mortgage we at least for 10 to 15 years to pay off would be able to. And so are you not pathetic to pay for rent to strangers for so long? The conversation took place in the apartment of Elena's parents, where the young couple decided to live after the wedding. And then, according to the plan, they were to live with his parents. And then in general, Elena such a nomadic movement between 2 apartments, even if in each and they could live in a room with a balcony, did not like it at all. She wanted to feel herself a mistress in her own house. She wanted to finally avoid even the small conflicts that would inevitably arise when 2 families lived under the same roof. After all, she wanted to plan her pregnancy, and how could she have a baby, she thought, if she didn't have her own apartment? Elena didn't want to live like this as she had to. "It's a pity," said Nikolai, "but you think about this. Suppose we take out a mortgage, and then something happens and that's it. We cannot pay it. What happens?" Elena frowned. "Oh, don't make it up. Everything will be fine. Do you know how many people we know have even managed to close their mortgages early? And I have acquaintances who were evicted by banks." Nikolai sniggered. "And what should we do?" "Well," smoothly began to bring to the topic, which has long planned Nikolai. "If your and my parents could help us with money, then we could immediately buy a place to live. At least a studio for starters. They can help with money, but not like this," sighed Elena. "And the garage and the car?" Nikolai hinted. "Your father is still after his heart was bad, afraid to drive, sits behind the wheel. And what? Why, all stands idle in dust, as they say. Besides," Nicholas moved closer, looking into his eyes, "you sold your great-grandmother's house in the village, didn't you? Some money too. You know, if we weren't married, I would be frightened by your knowledge of our finances." Elena looked away. She always felt uncomfortable when her husband looked at her like that. But why? She couldn't understand. "Well, okay," she said just to end the conversation. "I'll think about it and talk to Mom and Dad later, okay?" And the conversation did take place. Elena chose a time when her husband was not at home, and called her parents to the kitchen. And there, blushing and confused, laid everything out, conveyed the idea of Kalia. "In general, it may not be bad," said the father. "After all, I would on the car really no longer want to take risks. One accident was enough for the rest of my life. But here you need to think carefully. My daughter, it would be necessary to formalize everything, so that in the divorce, when the apartment will divide, Your part corresponds to how much we are now invested, added Mom. What does divorce have to do with it? Elena was confused at first. We're fine. It's good now. Shook his head father. And we wish you a diamond wedding anniversary to celebrate. But life, it is such a thing unpredictable. So, this is just in case, so to speak, reflections. The next day Nikolai not only asked Elena to tell how everything went, but also informed her that his parents were ready to invest a substantial amount of their personal savings. It would seem everything is going well. You can just rejoice at the good fortune that accompanies important marks of life's path. But something did not give Elena peace. And only much later, looking back, she realized that must have been on a subconscious level, even then began to notice the negative, bad changes in her husband's behavior and the way they communicated with each other. No, Kalya did not allow himself to insult her, and even when they quarreled, he did not raise his voice. But he sometimes offensively besieged Elena, joked about her ideas, criticized, at the same time convincing his wife. That criticism is quite a concern. You just need to take it reasonably and not behaving like a hysterical fool. True, the troubles that traditionally surrounded such a thing as buying a home, for a while, muted the reigning differences between the spouses. There was simply no time left for clarification of relations. But then, when the move with the housewarming took place, when did it happen for the first time? Elena realized that such an important event should not be lost in the labyrinths of memory. But much later, looking back, could not remember when Kalya, in the heat of an argument over some trivial matter, so lost his temper that he just grabbed the first thing that came to hand and smashed it on the floor. It's your mom's vase, Elena gasped. Nicholas said later that he did not understand what it came over him. But Elena from this case began to fear him somehow. However, even if there was no this aggressive outbreak, she would still be dissatisfied with what is slowly turning their relationship. They were just becoming kind of unleavened, gray, faded, boring. And one morning, barely awake when the drowsiness of sleep was still dormant, Elena suddenly realized that she could not imagine her family life in 10, 20, or 30 years. What would happen to them then? How much strangers they will have time to become for each other, if even now there is no normal life. And the kids? Yes, they had recently had several serious discussions about whether it was time to have a baby. Only Elena was no longer so enthusiastic about it and answered, "Say, we should still think about it. After all, it is not a fish aquarium, not a hamster." And time, it was running, and it was necessary, of course, to decide something. And then if Lena believed in fate and the reasonableness of the universe, she would have taken what happened as a sign. The fact was that Nikolai had cheated on her. Or had he? Is it possible, Elena pondered, fixing her eyes on the correspondence found in her husband's phone. Is it possible that the treason was accomplished by 50 to 70%? But not to the end. She just didn't know how to evaluate what she found in Kalya's smartphone. It turned out that he had been in close contact with a very distant mutual acquaintance for more than 3 months. This acquaintance had a beautiful name, Angelica, and she was 3 times divorced, and also always surrounded by a crowd of fans. And now, someone else's husband also in the collection decided to take. Elena even clenched her fists involuntarily, so she hated Angelica in an instant. She would have clung to her black curls. But the storm of emotions suddenly subsided, because Elena's brain was pierced by a new thought. And why, in fact, she put the blame on Angelica. Is Nikolai a Willis toy, an animal on which the leash was thrown and led somewhere? No, everything was different. And if he did not want, then, of course, Angelica would not constantly write him such dirty things, would not send him her photos seductive. And so Kalya. Elena called her husband. He was now in the next room, where he was chatting with his mother. Yes, my mother-in-law came to visit. She brought pickled salads for winter. She came to share family gossip, and now she and Kalya were discussing the nuances of repair in the bathroom. What tiles to choose, while Elena was sent to the kitchen to quickly set the table for tea. And now, on this very table was found her husband's phone. And later, looking back, Elena could not understand, and what prompted her to get into it at all. After all, she had lived before without such a thing, and in general, tracking the other half of the considered extreme stupidity, which resorted to very desperate people whose marriage is doomed. Perhaps she was interested in the contents of Kalya's smartphone, because today for the first time in many days he forgot it unattended, and so usually always carried with him. In any case, that's how it ended. What? My husband looked into the kitchen. Why, you haven't made sandwiches yet? Elena looked up at him, and it must have been very telling, because Nikolai suddenly went red and blinked a lot. I'll explain everything. He's getting there fast, Elena thought. And actually, she was going to have a cultural conversation to ask how far he was going to go. Did he have a conscience? Was he going to tell her at all? But nerves could not stand it, and Elena rolled a scandal as bright as fireworks and ruthless as a volcanic eruption. As a bonus, the mother-in-law was involved in it. Elena was not surprised at all that the mother-in-law was on her son's side. Lena learned a lot about herself. She is not a housewife. She can't feed her husband deliciously, not beautiful and look after herself as a real woman. Does not know how, not smart and embarrasses him all the time, does not know how to save money, and very, very much said mother-in-law, damn you all. Elena shouted and ran out of the apartment. Luckily, it was not even necessary to dress for a long time. It was late summer, and the breath of autumn brought only bright colors on the trees and bushes, but not the cold, cold, cold. At first Elena wanted to sit on the bench at the entrance, but immediately dismissed the idea he would then come down, and maybe with her mother-in-law, and the scandal will continue maybe to his parents to go. Yes, perhaps that would be best, thought Lena, and was already heading for the bus stop when she received an unexpected message on her phone. It was Alexander. It turned out that he had come back here, to this city, and here he was, back, settled in a rented apartment, paid visits to old friends, and now he decided to surprise her and invited her to meet, sit in a cafe, chat. All this he sent by text, which was unusual for him. But Elena didn't pay much attention to it. She needed something else right now. Hi, she said, dialing his number. Can I come to you right now? Alexander seemed surprised, but dictated the address. And then as soon as Elena crossed the threshold of the apartment, she burst into tears and literally hung on the neck of her childhood best friend. What's wrong with you? Well, what are you, hey? What's wrong with you? Alexander asked. She mumbled something inarticulate about how cruel fate was. He took her to the kitchen and started drinking tea, slowly getting her to make sense. And Elena shared what an abomination her marriage was, and how she had just learned that her husband had no decency and conscience. You just don't give me to him. Please, Elena repeated a request pitifully and looked pleadingly at Alexander. And she also thought suddenly that he was such an attractive man. Probably he has no shortage of admirers, and no ring on his finger. And Lena also thought that Sasha, he is, of course, an honorable man, and he would not have acted so nasty and disgusting as Nikolai. Sasha, she said quietly, I should have been so wrong then. What do you mean? He did not understand. I mean when you brought me flowers. 3 roses, remember, and then you left. You mean that? He smiled. I think it was in another life. Yes, I shocked you then. I should have been smarter. No, she shook her head. I was the fool then. I should have realized that she was ready to say it. Such important words, the most important words in the world, about how she had made a big mistake, and should have let those sprouts of future true love settle in her heart. About the fact that now her eyes were opened, and she believed that the past, it can be corrected, if here and now to make the right decision, to change everything abruptly, not afraid to trust her feelings. But she was stopped by Alexander's gaze, and if she had read in it surprise, confusion, she would have found the right words. And if she had read indifference in it, she would not have lost hope, because they had a common past. They had something that was not so easy to erase. But in Alexander's eyes she read pity. He looked at Elena as if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, and he, alas, could not prevent her. Sasha, she said in a colorless voice. Sashenka. No, he shook his head. Do you have someone? No. But someday I'll probably meet a woman I'll love. Then why? Helena had never imagined that her heart could hurt so much. It seemed to empty out, and in its place was a deafening blackness that consumed her whole being with every breath. But we could have if you had come back then, after university, and we would have. Lena. Alexander stood up abruptly from the table and walked across the kitchen. He stopped at the window. He turned to her again. No, I'm not sure that we would have succeeded. I'm not a perfect man, Lena. For me, right now, my work comes first. You mean you put animals before family and love? She knew she shouldn't have been so rude, but she couldn't keep quiet. Call it what you want, he answered, but I think you're just nervous right now. Just like that. Lena grinned bitterly. She suddenly felt so lonely the word was thrown into outer space. Alexander, sighing, came back, sat down opposite her, and tried to explain everything. He went back to the past and opened up about what Elena meant to him then. He shared with her how he had tried several times to have a serious relationship, but time after time they required him to spend less time in a profession he was just beginning to develop seriously, and admitted that he had decided to basically give up on relationships for the next few years, while he developed as a professional and the like. I guess I'd better leave, Elena said at the end. I see. Thank you for explaining everything. Let me walk you out. You shouldn't be in this state. I'm fine. Lena snorted. I've lived without you before, haven't I? I'll manage on my own from now on, but Alexander, asking her not to talk nonsense on emotions, still insisted on taking Elena in his car to her parents. But in the apartment did not go up. They said goodbye at the entrance. And when Elena shared with her parents what happened, that is, told them about her husband's secret affair, she did not say a word about Alexander. Why? All the same, she thought he appeared in her life fleetingly, like a comet, and it did not mean anything serious. That's it. I'll show my son-in-law how to offend my daughter, Victor said. But Elena's mother literally grabbed him by the hand and asked him not to get heated, adding that they would like to know Elena's opinion first. Do you want to save the marriage? She asked. He hadn't cheated yet. Maybe you just had problems, so he was looking for, well, the attention of another. Maybe you should talk. Elena still felt a little bit like she was in space, lonely and lost. In general, she expected her parents, especially her mom, to help her make the right decision. But what was the right one? The one that she wouldn't regret. There was no time to think calmly because soon Nikolai himself rushed to them. His eyes were guilty, in his hands a bouquet of flowers. And when his father-in-law grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, he didn't even twitch. Dad, Elena unhooked her husband. We'll do it ourselves. Please don't. You're a fool, daughter. Victor sighed and waved his hand and went into the far room. Svetlana, fussing, told her daughter that it was time to cook dinner and suggested that maybe they should go to the small room to talk. Lena had once lived there herself, and now they were renovating it. In general, there was a place to talk without unnecessary ears. Though they had to talk standing up, there was no furniture in the room, which was ready to be whitewashed. I love you and I was wrong, said Nikolai. And that's all? Asked Elena after a solidly so prolonged pause. And what else is there to say? He shrugged. What an idiot, and made a big mistake. So it's already clear. But the fact that I love you, that's for sure. Really? But then how did all this become possible? Elena, holding the bouquet in her hands, looked at the lily petals. She had never liked these flowers, and the smell of them, I wanted to sneeze from it. Her husband had forgotten again. However, it was not his worst act. Nikolai remained silent, just stood with his head down and sniffed. Elena grinned crookedly, and yet she could have said that she loved him. So much love that she was ready to forgive perhaps. But now it was different. No, Elena realized, they didn't have the kind of love that was real and magical. What do they have? Sympathy, I guess, and a life together. And the ability to admit and forgive mistakes. And also, Elena thought, he shouldn't need to know how close she'd been to leaving. If only her first love had beckoned. Here you go, she said, handing the bouquet back to him. I don't like lilies. Come on. Let's go home. You'll talk to your mom yourself, okay? We'll forget everything. We'll start over. One more chance for our family, okay? Nikolai's eyes shone. He nodded. Elena smiled back. Perhaps she really is a fool, as her father said. But this is her choice in her life, and maybe she would still be happy, or at least just live a life that wasn't so bad. That could be quite enough too. After all, I wanted to believe that.